Welcome into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And as always, we are coming to you live for the first 30 minutes of practice, trying to show you as many live shots of the action as we can. And of course, we're also going to take your Facebook questions in our final segment. So if you're not already watching on over there, head over to the Buccaneers Facebook page, leave your questions in the comment section for us on there. And that's where we'll get to those in the final segment. And of course, we like to start with our Ticketmaster play of the day. So let's go ahead and roll that. All right, we got Jalen Darden making the catch here, and he's a guy that you've talked about how you've been very excited to watch him.
Yeah. So I like to see that.
Yes.
And as Coach said the other day, he's doing a really good job of getting open. He just needs to make every catch. And he said he has really good hands, and you saw it right there. He did a nice job on that one. But I'm really high on him. I'm really excited about
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure. Okay, so we also wanted to start, we've gotten to hear some guys talk in the media after practice, and one of those guys is Carlton Davis, and that's a guy that I know that it's crazy to realize he is the elder statesman of this room, because it's not like he is an old man out here.
He's going into his fourth year.
The elder statesman of the DBs has been an integral role not only on the field but in terms of his leadership and bringing some of these guys along. And I wanted to hear what stood out to you, either from what he said in the media, what you see at practice, or just what we know about Carlton at this point.
Yeah, Carlton's confident, and he also has pretty lofty goals, and he put it in a term that I don't think I've heard a cornerback say before. He used a different words than you hear from them. He said he wanted to be a corner that opposing quarterbacks and offensive coordinators fear. They don't want to go up against him. And, he's already established himself as one of the NFL's better cornerbacks. We have a graphic here over the last year he was second in the league. He was second in the league in passes defense last year. Over the last 2 years together, he's first in the league with 37. And last year he got some more interceptions and actually led the team in that. And Coach Arians says he compared him to a cornerback that I know because I worked for the Chiefs way back when, and they had a great corner back then named Albert Lewis, a Pro Bowler. But Coach Arians said Albert Lewis was great at denying passes, but he never caught the ball. He never had interceptions because he didn't have great hands, whereas he thinks Carlton Davis has good hands that are getting even better. And just at the very bottom of that graphic was what showed you how he can be a shutdown corner on another team's opposing number one. The last 3 times combined that the Bucs have faced the Saints with Michael Thomas healthy, mostly by Carlton Davis, they've held Michael Thomas to a combined 8 catches for 68 yards and no touchdowns in those games.
That is incredible. I mean, that's the thing. For Carlton to have the kind of stats he's had, if you think about the wide receivers he's had to go up against, especially in this division, meaning multiple games a year, it's one thing to kind of, you're the top corner, you're always going to be on the top guy. That's going to mean a lot of different things depending on what division you're in, what team you play for. And he got thrown into the fire as a rookie even, and every year he has had to face some big-name guys. So those stats to me mean even more.
Yeah, and I think that he has really blossomed with Todd Bowles' arrival for the last 2 years. His last 2 years have been outstanding. His first year, he was a rookie for one thing, but it was a bit up and down. I think he's really found his niche in this defense. It allows him to play very aggressively. He's very good at man-to-man coverage, at pressing and then staying in coverage. He's got good hips and feet, so he turns well and mirrors routes. I just think he's a really good fit for this defense.
And I'm glad you brought up Todd Bowles talking about these DBs because, we focus a lot on the X's and O's part of a coordinator, of what is their scheme and how is that working. But Todd Bowles has not only done great with that, but he has absolutely elevated these DBs' game to another level because of the way that he teaches them, the way that he spends time with them in the film room. We've heard that from all of them, and I feel like particularly Jamal Dean, that was somebody who there was a huge jump that year where he had a rough game against Seattle, I think it was, and then turned around and made just these huge plays the very next week. And he credited Todd Bowles for sitting down and teaching him how to learn, teaching him how to watch the film, how to be a pro, the difference in being a college DB versus a pro guy. And you see that with all of them, the way that Todd Bowles has made an impact.
Well, and it's been a nice situation for Todd Bowles that he got all these guys. They're talented and they're young, and the Bucs put so much draft capital into their secondary over the last 3 or 4 years, and we're also talking about safety there too. So it's been a real good opportunity for Todd Bowles to take these young guys and mold them, and like you said, he's done a really good job.
What do you think we're going to see this year in terms of the DBs of Is there going to be any shift at all in terms of rotation or playing time, or who's in, things like slot and outside? And do we feel like it's going to be a wash, rinse, repeat of last year, or how could that be any different maybe?
Well, it probably can't go exactly like last year, because last year there was changes along the way. I mean, you had Carlton Davis at one spot, and that was pretty steady. He pretty much stayed there whenever he was healthy. But between Jamal Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting, there was some switching back and forth, because Sean Murphy-Bunting was our best option in the slot. And for part of the year, he was playing that Ronde Barber type role, where he starts when you're in two corners and he starts on the outside, then he moves into the slot, and then Jamal Dean comes in and plays the outside. But then for part of the year, when Sean Murphy wasn't playing as well, Murphy-Bunting wasn't playing as well, and Jamal Dean was sort of ascending, Sean just played in the slot, and Jamal took all the snaps on the outside, even when there were only two of them. And that switched back and forth several times, depending on who was playing better. And then after that, the guy that came in when you were missing anybody was Ross Cockrell. And I think you could see pretty much that same four-man rotation this year.
Yeah, and Ross Cockrell's the guy that didn't always get the most attention maybe of all of our DBs, and came in late and wasn't as well known and all that, but he did make some incredible plays, and they spoke so highly of him. And then I think I've already seen him making a couple splash moments out here as well, and it is amazing to see that, yeah, they're also young, but to now be talking about that position where they have had to put so much draft capital to feel good about your depth. Mm-hmm. I think, you always went on your rants about you can never have too many
they don't
DBs.
Have to be rants.
Well, okay, you got on your little soapbox. You got on your soapbox
never
about
can
your
have
DBs.
Enough quality
never can have enough quality of those guys. And now I feel like we are at a place where we feel good about all of our starters and some of the depth.
Yeah, like Herb Miller, guys like that. I think they like him a lot as well. But the thing about Ross Cockrell this summer is he's actually played safety the last 2 days, because we've been really thinned out by injuries and some COVID things, and some guys on various active and reserve lists. And so they just needed some more bodies there. And Ross Cockrell's a guy that they found is a really smart guy, and he can handle multiple assignments. So they thought, let's try him at safety because we need depth right now. And if he proves he can cover a couple of these spots as well, and maybe be good enough on a game day to fill in at 3 or 4 different spots in the secondary, that could give you some flexibility as to what other players you keep active on that day. So, and Ross had an interception in the 2-minute drills yesterday playing safety. So, yeah, he came in September. Actually just put him on the practice squad. The rookie Parnell Motley was actually on the active roster then. But over the course of a couple weeks, the coaches realized we got to get this guy on the active roster and playing every day because he's good.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. We want to show you guys the highlights from yesterday's practice, and then we'll be back with even more topics and, of course, answering your questions. So if you have a question for us, put it in the comment section underneath our live video on the Buccaneers Facebook page, and we'll be back after these highlights. Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And again, we are coming to you live the first 30 minutes of every open training camp practice. We're talking about all the major topics and discussions about different players, position groups, everything you want to know, and of course taking your questions. If you have a question for us, leave it in the comment section underneath our Facebook Live video. For right now, I know we talked a little bit about Carlton Davis because he had spoken in the media. Another guy that we got to hear from in the media, Mike Evans. So I wanted to hear for you, I mean, it's not like we don't know who Mike Evans is at this point. That is the delightful thing about this roster. So many guys. What did that look like this year, this offense, everybody that comes back? What do we think we could expect from him?
Yeah, you're right. We don't need to tell Buck fans how good he is, but let's do it anyway.
Yeah, sure. Why not? It's fine.
Here's some stuff about Mike. He's already our all-time leader in all 3 of those categories with 532 catches for 8,266 yards and 61 touchdowns. You just said the note. He's the only player, the second one there, the only player ever to do that. The thing that people I don't think realizes how close he is to breaking Mike Allstott's really strong team record for overall touchdowns. He's 10 away from breaking it. And then this is something I looked up yesterday. Mike Evans gets a lot of first downs. Almost every ball he catches is a first down because he has one of the farthest average depth of reception of any receiver or player in the league. So usually when he catches, it's past the sticks. And so he's third in the league behind, I think, Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins in that category since he came into the league. So he moves the chains. By the way, Antonio Brown is fifth on that.
Wow, that's incredible. What an embarrassment of riches we have at that position. And I think the word for him that comes to my mind is efficiency.
Sure.
Because you talk about that of the quality of his catches, that it's not just a catch, it's going to be, for a first down level amount of yardage. And then I even remember a game where all he had was 2 catches for 2 yards.
And 2
touchdowns. Yeah. Like, if that doesn't say efficiency, I don't know what does.
Well, what that also says is there are some games, and they happen from time to time, where the other team says, we're taking Mike Evans out. We're going to double him all day, and we're going to make it almost impossible for you to throw to him. But you can't do that quite as well at the goal line. So even if they make an effort to do that, and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown are lighting it up instead, when you get down to the goal line, he's still a huge part of it no matter what the other team is trying to do.
Right.
But, so Mike was talking the other day, and he said he tries to get better every year. I mean, where does he have to go from here, right?
Yeah.
Where can he go from here? He just needs to be the same player for us that he's been all along. And he says he feels like he's in better shape than he was last year, but he was already in pretty good shape. So he just needs to be what he has been, right? But I think he wants to do even more, and we'll see if he can do that.
Yeah, and I think I will be really interested to see just how that wide receiver rotation looks to start the year having all of them, because it's easy to forget that Antonio Brown didn't join us till later.
Right,
and
mid-season.
Just the fact that whole offense was still figuring everything out, and how little time they got with Tom Brady early on when we didn't have that offseason.
Yes.
I mean, that group, to me, as much as we talk about how they are the most known maybe of all the position groups, if we know what they are, we know what each guy brings, we know how incredibly good they are, it also still is going to be so interesting to watch because of the fact that everything was so different and weird to start last year. Now you have all this time and chemistry with Tom Brady, and you have Antonio Brown to start with. So how do you think that will affect the rotation, who's in what spot, the number of catches, the number of reps some of these guys are getting?
Well, and Chris Godwin was battling through injuries for most of the season, too. And there was a time when a bunch of receivers before Antonio Brown got here were hurt, and Mike Evans was dragging around one bad leg because we didn't hardly have anybody.
Yeah.
And we don't know yet what Tyler Johnson might be capable of. So there's a lot to be figured out there. But I do think your main three are still going to be Mike. When we're in 3 receiver sets, Mike and Antonio on the outside and Chris Godwin in the slot, because Godwin has just proven to be such a good weapon in the slot, one of the best slot receivers in the NFL, even though he's also a fantastic receiver on the outside. He's not one of these guys you picture as a slot receiver like a Julian Edelman. He's a big guy, but he operates really well out of the slot.
Right, and Scotty Miller, I think, is going to be interesting to see the role that he plays, because he did prove so reliable and consistent, especially in those, his Green Bay game. He had just some incredible moments for this team, and he talked about his confidence last year and the jump that he had made to that year. And do you feel like we could see another jump from him, or do we feel like last year was about what you want and hope from him?
If you get what you got last year amidst all these other receivers, that's
happy.
probably you're happy about it. But he can definitely do more. It just depends on how many snaps and how many targets he gets. But I think one thing that we overlook about Scotty, because he's obviously a burner. He's really, really fast, right? And that's why we've seen some of those highlight big plays downfield, and we need to utilize those speed. But he can make the tough catch, too, at the end of that play. He's not a big guy, and there's often a defender near him, right? And think of the two biggest catches he made last year, the one in Green Bay and the one in the back corner in Las Vegas. Both were huge plays, and neither one was an easy catch, and he made it look easy.
Yeah, that Vegas one really was.
It was an amazing throw, for one thing.
Yes, that was an unbelievable play. And we have heard that of how much Brady trusts him, and that means so much.
That started in camp last year. That was a big story about how Brady was really getting to have good chemistry with him.
And we saw that it was for a reason that they absolutely had that. So outside of those guys that are the known quantities at wide receiver, how about some of these other guys that are the fringe guys? And if you were to make a bet on how many wide receivers you end up keeping, what would you say that is?
Well, that's going to come down probably to special teams considerations. It'll either be 5 or 6. Sometimes you roll with 7 for a little while, but usually not permanently, depending on if guys are hurt or so on. But you can count it up pretty quickly. I don't think any of us expect Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Scotty Miller not to be there. Those 4 seem obvious. Tyler Johnson just drafted last year. And then you got the guy you just drafted this year, Jalen Darden, who, if he's your punt returner, then that's 6 right there, and Jaden Mickens is going to be battling him for that job. Then there's just a bunch of young guys that started here last year, like Travis Johnson and Josh Pearson, and those guys will sort themselves out, and a couple of them could end up on the practice squad, but it'll be hard to cut this down to 6 and still find a spot for one of those young guys.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Tyler Johnson because of the fact that he is a guy who also didn't get a ton of reps out there for obvious reasons. It's a crowded room, but then when he did, he made the most of them.
And he didn't get much work in training camp in the offseason because he was battling injuries. So he sort of had to pick it up on the fly as a rookie receiver, and that's not easy. And no, he didn't get a ton. I think he had maybe 15 targets, something like that, 15 to 18 targets, but he had 12 catches, and I think it's a good sign that I can remember several of them because they were pretty big plays. I mean, a couple more touchdowns. One of them, I remember, we were told it was Tom Brady's 5th read on the play, so it was good that he stuck with his route.
Yeah.
And then another one was the amazing spinning catch that converted a long 3rd down in the New Orleans game in the playoffs that ended up preserving a very critical drive. So he could make some plays if given the opportunity. It's just, again, how do you find those snaps with all these other receivers?
Yeah, we've talked about the guys who were rookies last year and how challenging it was with all of the COVID stuff of not having the normal off season. And I feel like Tyler Johnson is the guy out of that whole group that I think could benefit the most from this year being more normal and having more chemistry with Brady because he didn't get the whole offseason and then he was hurt in training camp, and then it's the season and you got all these other guys that are getting playing time and you're just not always getting those reps potentially. So now I feel like the fact that he has this whole offseason, Brady now knows he can make some of his big plays, trusts him a little bit, might want to get him more involved. Do you feel like he would be the guy from last year's draft class that has the potential for the biggest jump this year?
Well, either him or Keyshawn Vaughn, but they're both in the same situation.
Yeah.
Just how are these snaps going to be figured out? But I do think Tyler Johnson, amongst all the receivers, has the most room to have a big difference in his output from last year to this year.
And do you feel like with Keyshawn Vaughn, is he going to be a guy that has a chance to be getting some meaningful snaps, or do we think it's a guy that he is really just mainly going to be for depth?
Well, but depth often comes into play. So we have to consider with both these young receivers and young running backs that somewhere along the line it's possible one of the guys in front of them is not available. It happens. So that may be when they get their shot. You got to assume somewhere along the way there's going to be some injuries. You just hope they're not major ones that knock you out for the whole year.
Right, absolutely. Okay, well, we are going to talk about one of the rookies this year real quick. We have a Meet the Rookies with Kyle Trask, so let's get to know him a little bit better.
I think the first Buccaneer to reach out, there was a couple, I'm not sure when they came in, but I know Tom Brady had texted me, welcomed me to the team, which I really appreciated. I was a big fan of his my whole life as a quarterback, really. So to have the opportunity to be in the same room and learn from one of the greats is an experience like no other. Going into the draft, I kept a really open mind because I know the draft can be crazy. You can land in a number of spots. So I knew Tampa had some interest in me, so I always had that in the back of my mind that might be a possibility. And it's right down the road from Gainesville, so it's perfect for me. Just had to drive my stuff about an hour and a half from Gainesville and move right back in. Coming into the league, it's just like, working your ranks through high school. You start as a freshman and you work your way up to the varsity. Same thing college, freshman all over again. You work your way up to, potentially a starter. And now in the NFL, you come in as a rookie and you got to work right back up that totem pole. One thing I know is I'm just going to work as hard as I possibly can, have no regrets, and be ready for whatever's asked of me at the end of the day. I'm already falling in love with this offense. I think there's a lot of similar traits to what I did in college as far as, run game and the concepts and throwing from the pocket. So I think that's going to help me out. And really, it's just different verbiage at the end of the day. Obviously, in the NFL, it's going to be a little more depth of the playbook, a little wider range of plays, but I knew that coming into this thing, and I'm just looking forward to how much football I can possibly learn. A lot of the characteristics I think that I bring to the table is just my consistency, my accuracy, and I'm always going to try to be the best teammate I could possibly be, and just be selfless and determined and do whatever I need to do to help the team.
Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And every day there is an open practice. We'll be here with you for the first 30 minutes of it, trying to give you as many live look-ins to practice as we can, talking about some of the big topics, and of course taking your Facebook questions, which is what this last segment here is for. So if you have a question for us, go ahead and put it in the comment section of our live video. And let's start with one from Alan. He said, have you seen any flashes of Joe Tryon, or when would we get to see some more about him?
You'll start to see, we'll probably be talking about Joe a little bit more when we get to Saturday and beyond, because that's when the pads go on. And not only will that show up in the team drills, but then they'll start doing those one-on-ones with pads on and full contact with the offensive and defensive linemen that we like to watch so much. And that's when we'll probably be talking about him and all the guys in the trenches a lot more, because right now they're really not supposed to be doing a lot of contact. So
Right.
a pass rush is kind of,
Yeah.
you're mirroring each other,
Tap.
maybe you touch each other. So it's a little hard to tell, but Coach has on several occasions said very good things about him, that he's already looking like he'll be a good pass rusher. And Shaq Barrett yesterday called him the real deal and says he has a really bright future here in Tampa.
Man, and high praise from a guy
Yeah,
that you want some
knows
high
what
praise
he's
from.
doing, yep.
Yeah. All right, we had a question from Axel about Jalen Darden in terms of taking reps at the return position. So kick return, punt return, what are the odds he is one or both of those things?
Yeah, I was just, unfortunately, they just ended that drill of punt return. If they hadn't, we could have showed it on camera that he was one of three guys that was back there. Jaden Mickens was another one, and I can't recall who the third one was, but there were three guys taking reps back there. I don't know if we've had a kickoff return drill yet this camp. I didn't see it if we have. You know, they don't do all those things every day. Maybe today they're doing punt return and tomorrow kick return. I think he'll be involved in the mix in both of those right now, and I think he has a very good shot of winning at least the punt return job. I think that's what the team wants the outcome to be, and I hope it works out, because that's the best way for him to be on the 53-man roster and on the active roster on game day.
Okay, and Christopher brought up some of the tight ends vying for a roster spot and wanted to know who are the non-big name guys
No, it's a
that
good
might
question.
still make it.
It's a good question and a topical one, because with O.J. Howard and Cam Brate still not practicing, I haven't checked yet. Good job by Alec there catching one of the guys I was about to talk about, Tanner Hudson. Tanner Hudson and Cody McElroy have been getting a lot more reps because those other two guys are out, and they both showed up quite a bit. They're good route runners and pass catchers. I think I mentioned it the other day, I saw Cody McElroy make a whole bunch of catches in one 7-on-7 drill. So that's a good thing for those guys, because yeah, we probably have, assuming everybody's healthy and ready to go, we probably have the obvious top three in Rob Gronkowski and Cam Brate and O.J. Howard. But we often carry four tight ends and even keep them all active on game days, especially if one or both or more of them can be on special teams, and you're not really going to get that out of the top three guys.
Okay.
But I think a guy like Tanner Hudson or Cody McElroy could help you out a little bit on special teams. So, you know, we also have Jarrell Adams here in camp. He's a veteran who made a couple nice catches back in the end zone yesterday. And then a guy we just signed, Daquan Hampton, don't know a whole lot about him yet, but there's a couple other guys in the mix, but I do like seeing Tanner and Cody get some more playing time.
Okay, and we had a question from Matthew asking, has there been a rookie that has impressed you at camp so far?
Let's see. I mean, I guess Jalen Darden's kind of been up and down. I've been impressed by his route running and his speed. Chris Wilcox has been out. We just talked about Joe Tryon. I will say that here, let's just put it this way. Coach Arian said yesterday that when he went back and looked at the tape from field 2, you know how we split them up when we were doing some drills,
Right.
and 90 guys here, and so you have Tom Brady and Blaine Gabbert and most of the 1s and 2s over here, and then the deeper down reserves over here. And Coach was asked about what he saw in the film, because he's over there watching those guys, doesn't see what they do until later when he's watching the film. And he said he was amazed. It's the shortest mental error sheet from one of those sessions they've ever had,
Wow.
including the starters. He said he really only had 2, and they were both by offense by a guy who just got here this morning, so I assume he was talking about Daquan Hampton.
Yeah, which
So
seems fair.
he didn't hold that against him.
Yeah.
So that means that your guys like KJ Britt and Grant Stewart, who are playing linebacker, not just special teams over here, are doing a great job of studying and retaining what they're reading.
Yeah, that is really great to hear. And we kind of talked about this earlier, but Matthew had asked, a different Matthew, I think, do you think Tyler Johnson will be incorporated into the offense more?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier, and it's a tough question, because I think by virtue of talent, he would. I think on most teams that he would. And probably when it's all said and done, he will get that, because what we were talking about before, that's a reason why you want good depth, because sometimes you need it. You know,
Right.
guys got hurt last year. and other guys stepped up. And this year, if that happens again, I think Tyler Johnson will really step up.
And Shay had asked how Cameron Kenley is doing and what are the odds he can be a part of this team?
Well, there are 10 cornerbacks on the roster right now, 9 of them practicing. Chris Wilcox is on the PUP list. And you probably keep at most 6 of them, sometimes 5. So that's going to be hard for anybody to crack, you know. And you got, in addition to him, other guys fighting for those 5th or 6th spots are guys that are pretty established NFL veterans like Antonio Hamilton. So it's not going to be easy for Cam, and nobody ever expected it would be for a undrafted free agent coming to a team with a lot of depth at that position. But what you have to keep in mind is that you also have probably a 16-man practice squad. So even if Kenley doesn't overcome all those obstacles and make the active roster to start the season, I think there's a good shot. There's a spot for him on the practice squad, and that's just the way guys get their foot in the door and eventually get a shot. It happens all the time. So I do think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about Cameron Kenley's future. I just think looking at it on paper, it's hard for me to see without injuries him being one of your top 5 guys.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. This is somebody brought up somebody that we haven't talked about at all, and I'm glad they did. Let's see. I think his name is James. Asked
that's
how
a tough
will
one. I can see why you'd struggle with that one.
Very, what's his name? It says his name is Kef. At first, and then
but
then it said
James.
James. It says Kef James, and I was like, wait, which is the first? Which is the last name? What's happening? It threw me off. Wanted to know how the Bucs will use John Franklin III. This is a guy that we have not seen or talked about in quite a while, but as we did talk about some of our depth positions earlier on the offense, this is a guy that is still out here.
Yeah, they won't use him at all until he gets on the field.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the active PUP list, which, as we discussed yesterday, the purpose of that is if you put them on that list before camp starts, then you have the option of putting them on the reserve PUP list before the start of the regular season, in which case they would miss at least 6 games before they could come back. So there's a chance that John Franklin isn't ready by the start of the season. I can say that simply by the fact that they put him on that list.
Right.
That they have to be considering there's a chance that will happen.
Right.
As an example of the opposite side, O.J. Howard hasn't practiced yet, unless he's out there today. But they did not put him on the PUP list, which makes me think they're expecting him back
A little bit sooner.
Yeah. So with John Franklin, I know the coaches liked what he was doing in practice in training camp a year ago, and then he blew out his knee on just a fluky non-contact play. And he is still not back on the field from that injury. And that's a year now.
It's a long time.
Almost a year now. So
It's a tough injury.
yeah, so he didn't practice in the offseason. He's not practicing yet. What you could get out of him if he's on the roster for some reason, the John Franklin story is we brought him in here in, I think, 2019, promoted him to the active roster towards the end, and put him on the field for one play after he converted to wide receiver, and he took an end around for 11 yards, which is nice. I think they think he could do a lot of gadgety type stuff, but he just needs to get healthy and find a spot.
Okay. Matthew asked, how is Jeremiah Ledbetter looking at camp, and do you see him starting instead of, he said instead of Nunez Roches, but I don't know that we call him a starter either. So looking at that rotation in there in the inside, how do you see that shaking out in some of your depth there?
Yeah, I can't give you a direct answer on how Jeremiah Ledbetter's looked so far because, like I said, with the big guys, it's a little hard to tell. And he's not a player that has been talked about by the coaches yet. But, yeah, you pointed out Rakeem Nunez Roches was the starter for much of last year because Vita Vea got hurt, but Vita Vea's back, so presumably your starters inside again are Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh and Will Golston, and barring injuries, which we keep saying, I have a hard time seeing Jeremiah Ledbetter replace one of them. But you do need that nice rotation there. I think they'd like to have at least 5 guys, and so he's vying for time with Nunez Roches, who was re-signed, and Steve McClendon, who was re-signed. So and then Khalil Davis, the draft pick from last year. So I do think Jeremiah Ledbetter impressed at the end of last year, and that they like him quite a bit. But that's a lot of competition for depth spots there.
Yeah, which again is always a great problem to have.
Yeah, that's what you want.
That's what you want. We had a question from Seth saying, do you think that we'll see Trask playing in the preseason?
Yeah, I think so, probably. Especially if your plan is to keep him as your third quarterback. I mean, that's when you're going to look at him, because unless things go catastrophically badly, you're not playing him during the regular season. So if you want to see him in games, that's when to do it.
How do you see the reps being distributed in preseason for quarterbacks when now we have 4 of them, but you have one that you may not want to play at all, and then you only have 3 games as compared to 4? I feel like that's the area that I'm most excited to see how preseason looks across the league, even of how teams handle that when it comes to their quarterbacks and only having those 3 games.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a ton of Tom Brady. I think that'll come down to what does Tom Brady want, because if he tells the coaches that he wants a half, they'll probably give him a half, right? But in a normal 4-game preseason, the starters don't play a ton in the first 2 games, and they play a lot in the 3rd game, and then not at all in the 4th game. So the question is, are coaches going to use this 3rd game, now that there's no 4th game, like the 4th game? Because they usually needed the 4th game to play all the young guys and make some last-minute roster and depth chart decisions. So I think you'd probably see a lot more of Blaine Gabbert and Kyle Trask and Ryan Griffin than you'd see at Brady.
Okay, and our last one we'll close with Rodney asked, do you think the kick return, punt return game will improve this year?
Yeah, I mean, it was steady last year, but what the Bucs want are some big plays. I've heard coaches say this before, special teams coaches, on punt returns in particular. Job 1 is you got to catch the ball. You got to be able to do that, catch every ball. Job 2, get us 10 yards. If you can get us on a reliable basis 10 yards, then that's good. And then 3, you want some big plays. J.D. Mickens did a good job with those first 2. Mm-hmm. And then in the playoffs, he had a couple in that 3rd category as well. So I think with him and Jalen Darden in the mix, there is some opportunity for some improvement in that area, and what it's going to come from is just some more splash returns.
Okay, well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Live. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to throw up that schedule to show you all the different days that we are going to be doing this show. So again, the first 30 minutes of practice, each of these days, we're going to be coming to you live here. We take your questions, we show you practice, we talk about all the big topics. So thanks, as always, for those great questions and for joining us, and we'll see you next time.